Today we're going to cover one of my favorite topics. And by the end of today's video, you're going to understand the true origins behind the famous role-playing game, Dungeons & Dragons. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer. This is our channel, Old School Rules, a place for everyone that loves classic RPGs and anyone who'd like to learn more about them. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you already know what Dungeons & Dragons is, and you probably know it was created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson back in 1974. Today's video is going to go back further in time to take a look at the inspiration behind the game we all know and love. Hope you enjoy the video. So to be clear, this is not some secret video where I'm going to tell you about manuscripts that have been discovered. If you want to know about the scholarship, about the creation of the rules for Dungeons & Dragons, I recommend you check out John Peterson's works. He's got Playing at the Worlds Volume 1 and 2, recently published. Fantastic books and very thorough on that topic. He also has his blog post, as do others, talking about different manuscripts that they've been discovering to understand the actual writing of those rules. What we want to look at today is the actual inspiration back behind the game that became Dungeons & Dragons. And this is where it all starts, these sort of pulp fantasy novels. You see here books by Fritz Leiber, Paul Anderson, R.E. Howard, Jack Vance, and others. And this is something that we commonly know as Appendix N. This is my first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, and in the back of that, after you have a bunch of rules, there are these appendices, and the very last one back there is Appendix N. And that's what this video is all about. Let's take a look at this. Inspirational and educational reading. Inspiration for all of the fantasy work I've done stems directly from the love my father showed when I was a tad. For he spent many hours telling me stories he made up as he went along. Tales of cloaked old men who could grant wishes, of magic rings and enchanted swords, of wicked sorceress and dauntless swordsmen. Then too, countless hundreds of comic books went down. The long-gone East Sea ones certainly had their effect. Science fiction, fantasy, and horror movies were a big influence. In fact, all of us tend to get ample helpings of fantasy when we are very young from fairy tales such as the Brothers Grimm, Andrew Long, and this often leads to reading books of mythology, paging through bestiaries, and consultation of compilations of the myths of various lands and peoples. Upon such a base, I built my interest in fantasy, being an avid reader of all science fiction and fantasy literature since the 1950s. The following authors were of particular inspiration to me. In some cases, I cite specific works. In others, I simply recommend all fantasy writing to you. And he goes through and gives you this list. And so this is, in many ways, the foundation upon which the whole game of Dungeons & Dragons was built. When you talk or read about things from Dave Arneson, he similarly had inspiration from this sort of pulp fiction or pulp fantasy works at the time. Really, really good stories. And if you haven't read them, then what I hope you'll do when you finish watching today's video is start making a list for yourself to find these at your local used bookstore. You can even find reprints of a lot of these more recently, and sometimes those actually are cheaper than trying to buy a first print from several years ago, even though they're paperback. Some of these surprisingly get a little pricey. All right, so he does three things here, and I'll get myself out of the way. He talks about specific books that authors had written. Then he'll talk about some series, and he'll also just name some authors with no particular work cited. So here we have Paul Anderson, 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, The High Crusade, The Broken Sword. I read 2 of those 3, the first and the last. Like 3 Hearts and 3 Lions is really good for information about chaos and law and the paladin character class that shows up in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Broken Sword, I think, gives you some ideas for, again, law and chaos and elves and maybe trolls and goblins are in that book. John Bellaire's The Face and the Frost. Elsbrog de Camp, Lest Darkness Fall, Fallible Fiend. That is a really interesting book about a demon that gets summoned. De Camp and Pratt had The Carnelian Cube, Sterling Lanier's Hero's Journey, and A. Merritt, Creep Shadow Creep, Moonpool Dwellers in the Mirage. And of course, these folks all wrote many more books than just this, but these are the ones that Gary lists. We got some authors that are pretty well known, Michael Moorcock, who did the Elric series, Stormbringer, Stealer of Souls. Swords Against Darkness, which is a compilation of stories, Fletcher Pratt, Blue Star, Fred Sobergen, Changeling Earth. All these are good books. I think what I'll probably do, because I'm reading my way through these right now, is do some short videos as I finish up a particular author or group of books and talk to you all about them a little bit more. Margaret St. Clair, Tolkien, which is interestingly downplayed a lot in not only here but other things that Gary talks about for whatever reason. Maybe because it was so popular at the time, I don't know. Jack Vance, very well known. He gives rise to the magic system, a lot of the magic system in the game. And Roger Zelazny. These are series, so there's more than one book here. So like Edgar Rice Burroughs has a Peluk Kadar, which is a like hidden Earth. Inside of our Earth, there's an alternate world. Mars was like the Barsoom, and you'll remember TSR did a series called Warriors of Mars, I think that without permission, and so they had to stop publishing that. And Venus, Lynn Carter has a series called World's End. DeCamp and Pratt, it says Harold Shea. This is the like complete Enchanter books. P.J. Farmer, World of Tears, Gardner Fox, Cathar, and Carrick. Ari Howard, who did the Conan books. Can't recommend those enough. I've just been reading those the last year or so. Really, really fun to read. Fritz Lieber, also tons of fun to read. Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. Moorcock is back here with his Hawk Moon series, and Roger Zelazny with the Amber series. And then here are some authors that have no book mentioned at all, but are part of the Appendix N. Leah Brackett, Frederick Brown, August Derrill, Lord Dunsany. Generally considered to be King Elfland's Daughter, I think, is his famous book that was an inspiration. Lovecraft, Andre Norton, Stanley Weinbaum, Manly Wade Wellman, and Jack Williamson. So, again, I recommend to you, make yourself a list, pick some, go to local. I actually wrote the entire list down, went to my local bookstore, and just went around and looked to see what I could find. That's how I got started on this. But there is more. But the Appendix N, that's from the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is certainly the most famous. And you'll see here at the end, Gary writes, the most immediate influences upon AD&D were probably DeCamp and Pratt, REH, which is Howard, Conan's books, Fritz Lieber, Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, Jack Vance, Fancy and Magic System, Lovecraft, and A. Merritt. But all the above authors, as well as many not listed, certainly helped to shape the form of the game. For this reason, and for the hours of reading enjoyment, I heartily recommend the works of these fine authors to you. And I do as well. The books, there's a lot of fun. My wife jokes. They're usually only a couple hundred pages, just little paperback books, right? And so you can read them in a few days' time if you're a pretty quick reader or dedicated reader. That is by no means the end of this story in terms of the inspiration for D&D. So we all know Dr. J. Eric Holmes wrote, or edited up the basic rules, and here's what he just has a little blurb in here. The universe obviously lies not too far from Middle-earth of Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, and it also draws on the fantasy works of Fritz Lieber, Robert Howard, Gardner Fox, and classical mythology, as well as other sources of inspiration that the DM may want to use. Then when we get to this basic set that's edited by Tom Moldvay, he has this full-page inspirational source material and says, a good D&D campaign is imaginative and creative. A little research can be useful to improve your dungeon, flesh out your scenario, and provide inspiration for a campaign. Books on folklore, mythology, fairy tales, bestiaries, and knightly legends can often help the DM fill in important details of a campaign. But fictional tales of fantasy and fantasy novels usually provide the best source of inspiration. And so here is a list. And he actually breaks it down. He's got like young adult fantasy here, fiction and nonfiction, and then he has for adults, and again, many of the same names, not all of the same names is what was in Appendix N. So there's some repetition, but there's also some additions here. And then there's one little last one here at the end. And then he also says, so some additional authors of fantasy fiction, and he lists even more people you can check out, some short story collections, and some nonfiction stuff you can read as well. We've got Bullfinch's mythology in there, and then some other information about folklores and folktales. This trend continues up to present day. 5e picked up on this idea when they did their rules back in 2014, and they have Appendix E, right, of inspirational reading you can consider. You can see it here. I get out of the way. It's many of the same ones, although some of them are repeated from books that were back on Gary's original list. So if you'd like to learn more, I've got a couple of recommendations for you. This is where I actually started when I decided to go on this journey. This is a book. It's Peter Berbigall. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's called Appendix N. Make sure you get the author and the cover, and you'll see why here in a second. It's basically, this is an anthology that has a bunch of stories by those authors. He talks a little bit about them, but mostly it's a chance to read some of those authors' works. To take a different look at that, you can go to Jeffro Johnson's book, also called Appendix N. That's why I say you got to look at make sure you get the right book, right author. He had a blog post reading through these books. This is much more, the second book is much more not a chance to read those authors, but for him to tell you about what he thought after he read them, right? So he'll tell you somewhat about what's in the story, somewhat about their style. Some of it's very critical, some of it's a little acerbic, but it's also an interesting read, I think, as well. And again, more inspiration maybe helps you decide, if you're not going to read the whole list of Appendix N authors, which ones maybe would be best for you. Some other things I think you can look at. Always the Aseum has great information about D&D. Not so much this topic, but if you want to learn more about the early days of D&D, the Aseum website is a great one to go to. I found some great posts on Grognardia. I'll give you that link down below. Facebook's groups, great ways to get connected to people. And there's a really good wiki page in fandom for this particular topic that gives a lot of detail, including names of all kinds of different books from all those authors. So it's sort of an expanded version if you want a better list before you start on this journey. So there you go, the true origins or inspiration behind the game of Dungeons & Dragons. Basically, I wanted to make this video to encourage everybody, read these books. I am really, really enjoying it. If you like D&D, I think you'll like the books, and it's really interesting to see the kind of things that Gary was reading that gave him his ideas of what sort of a D&D campaign or a fantasy adventure was all about. I find particularly the Conan books by Howard and others, and then the Fritz Lieber books to be great sources. And there's quite a bit of both of those. In addition, other people like 3 Hearts and 3 Lines. Clearly, that's where the Paladin comes from, but it's just the one book. The series where you really get to know the characters, I think the Conan books and the Fafhrd and the Great Mouser books are probably my favorites I've come across so far, but I'm really enjoying reading all these books. I love to read. Most people, I think, who play D&D love to read. So there's my video on the origins behind the game of Dungeons & Dragons. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you'll enjoy other things we're doing on our channel, and I hope you'll subscribe. If you know other people who might enjoy videos like this, please send them our way, and hopefully they'll be subscribers as well. Have a great rest of your day, and until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.